Well, if you had Psylocke on your bingo card for the next hero pack for the X-Force cycle now, you're good. You're good. You got it right. And this was a pretty big announcement. This was pretty cool. There's some really neat stuff going on here. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna break down a bit of the news. We're gonna read through the page, go through the cards, talk a bit about it, and then just give my overall thoughts. So let's dive right into the page. All right, so they named this a Flurry of Blades. It looks pretty cool. I mean, I know it doesn't really matter, but still, like, it looks cool. So they gave kind of an intro and whatever, and that's all fine. So they talk about that this powerful Psionic slashes her way into battle with this expansion pack, which introduces Psylocke as a new playable hero along her 17 signature cards. Right, 17. That's kind of crazy what they're doing here, which is pretty interesting. But we'll get into it with a pre-built Justice deck ready to play right away. This is great for everyone that loves Justice like me. One thing you'll notice with this is they're really kind of expanding out Justice a bit more. They focused on a lot of other traits over the past few years, especially like protection and even leadership and aggression. Now it seems like Justice is finally getting its turn. There's some cool stuff in here. So, all right, so I talked about versatile stuff and all that fun thing. So, as a hero, all about using her psionics to enhance her combat abilities. Betsy Braddock begins the game with 2 Psi Energy upgrades in play. She can exhaust these upgrades to shuffle psionic cards from her discard pile back into her deck, which is always huge, but that's only scratching the surface of what Psylocke is capable of. So really quick, let's look at Betsy really fast. 6 hand size, 10 hit points. Pretty standard. Actually, 10 hit points is like a little bit more because it seems like most of the X-Men now at this point are like at 9. So the fact that she's at 10 is kind of already better, even though we've been used to that. 3 recovery is a bit on the lower side. It's still fine, but right, it's a bit on the lower side. So Psionic Manifestation is a setup ability. Put your 2 Psi Energy upgrades into play, Psi Knife side face up. And we'll talk a bit about that in a second. There's an action that you can exhaust 1 Psi Energy upgrade. There's 2 of them, so you could do 1 of them. Shuffle 1 Psionic card from your discard pile back in your deck. So now, theoretically, you could do this twice, right? You could exhaust 1 of the Psi Energy upgrades, and then you could do it again and shuffle, do it again to shuffle a second Psionic card back in your deck. We'll get into why this will be really good later, but that is kind of an interesting mechanic it has going on. The other card it mentioned was the Psylocke hero card. The big thing that will jump out to you on this, and I guess I should mention too, on this side, she's a mutant psionic. On this side, psionic X-Force, right? Not X-Men, X-Force. It's important to note. One of the things that will jump out to you here is that she does drop down to a 4 hand size, which when I first saw, I was like, that's not great. But this is actually, the 4 hand size is fine, in my opinion. It's not that bad at all. So whenever she thwarts, attacks, or defends, you can use Psi Energy Control, which is the interrupt. It's not a force interrupt, it's just an interrupt, so you could choose to do this. When you use one of Psylocke's basic powers, you can flip Psi Energy Upgrade, or one of the Psi Energy Upgrades. We'll get into that in a little bit. All right, so each of her Psi Energy Upgrades is 2-sided, right? So they're both double-sided cards, important to note. Their initial side is Psi Knife, a handy upgrade that boosts her thwart stat, and also can be used to generate a mental resource. All right, let's look at this knife really fast. So it's a no cost upgrade. It's a permanent and comes in during setup. So Psylocke gets +1 thwart. All right, and then the hero resource exhaust Psi Knife. Generate a science resource. You may flip this card, so you don't have to, and you may. That'll be important for later on. But there's 2 of them that start on this side. So even though she's a 1-1-2 stat line, which is really weak, she's actually starting off as a 3-1-2 stat line. Where we've talked about this with Phoenix before. Phoenix having a 3 thwart stat line in the beginning is massive for her, right? Especially for a solo gamer, right? And again, a lot of this is from the lens of a solo player. For a solo player, 3 thwart controls the board state like really easily. So that she's starting with that is absolutely huge. The other huge side of this, of course, is that you have right away 2 hero resource generators. So it's not as good as, being able to do on your alter ego side, but that's fine. But you can exhaust it to generate a mental resource. And then you may choose to flip this card. We'll get into the other side in a second. But that's huge, right? Even having a 4 hand size, that's okay. Because I got 2 resource generators that I don't have to do anything for. They're just there on the table to begin with. That's really powerful. That's really strong to start off with. So, however, by either using it as a resource or through triggering her Psi Energy Control ability, which is the whole interrupt once you use the basic power, Um, Psylocke can flip her Psy Knife over to its Psy Katana side, which boosts her attack, gives her basic attacks piercing, which is crazy, and can still function as a resource generator later. All right, let's look at this. So it's a permanent. This is also a restricted keyword now. So if you're thinking about adding diff or other weapons in, you have to be careful how much you flip. So if you flip both of your side knives or the katanas, they're both restricted. So essentially your hands are full now. You could do something with like sidearm or whatever like that, or whatever it's called. That gives you like a third restricted keyword, but you just have to keep a mental note of that. Psylocke gets +1 attack, and her attacks gain piercing, which is crazy. It's absolutely crazy. Then as a hero resource, you can exhaust Psy Katana to generate a fist resource or a strength resource, and you may flip this card over. So now she can easily go from a 3/1/2 hero to a 3/1/2 hero, or if you just flip one of them over, she's a 2/2/2 hero who also then has piercing. It just naturally has piercing, which is absolutely huge. So the fact with the Psy Knife and Psy Katana is crazy. Also, again, you're not forced to flip these cards over, right? You just exhaust the knife to generate a resource, and then you may flip this card over. So if you want to stay as a 2/2 hero for most of the game, you can do that and still get your 2 resource generators. So it doesn't even like force you to flip things over and think about that too much. So this means that even though Psylocke has a 4 hand size, she has 2 extra resources that she can use each round on top of the ability to tweak her thwart and attack stats whenever she needs it in the moment. Huge. Absolutely huge. So even with this stuff is all pretty exciting, but like her kit gets more insane. It is really cool what they're doing. So naturally, the rest of Psylocke's kit builds off of her Psy energy upgrades as well. Events like Flurry of Blades, Mental Detection, and Psionic Redirect all have effects that scale differently depending on how many Psy knives versus Psy katanas you control. So let's check this out. In the past, we've seen a lot of cards that are like massive hitters, like, 3 for 8, let's say, or whatever. This doesn't work like that. And it's kind of fascinating. And this leads me to believe that she is really geared more, not that she's geared towards solo, but she's going to work really well in solo. So it's a 3-cost event, kind of expensive, but you have 2 resource generators, so that's fine. Deal 2 damage to an enemy. 3 for 2, terrible, but that's okay. For each side knife you control, choose an enemy and confuse it. All right, this is kind of big, right? If you're working on controlling the board state and you have the knives out, awesome. For each Psy Katana you control, choose an enemy and deal 2 damage to it. So this could end up being a 3 for 6 kind of thing, but we've seen with what is it? The aggression cards that add +1 to your attack. We're looking at several attack lines, so it could boost that card up a bit. So that's nice to see. We saw this a bit more with Gambit. So there is a way to basically get this up higher. So it basically turns into a 3/3/3, so like a 3 for 9 attack, which is a bit more standard. So if you're going the aggression route, there's some things you can play around with that. For let's assume you keep her in justice, like the attack really isn't that strong. Like 3 for 6 isn't like anything crazy. But again, it's now helping you especially as a justice player, if you play her in justice, to control the board state, right? So you're able to, okay, yeah, maybe only do 2 damage here, 2 damage here, and 2 damage here. But if there's 3 minions on the table that all have 2 life or fewer, that's huge, right? You're clearing out the board state pretty easily. If you just do the 1 Psy Knife, 1 Psy Katana, being able to confuse an enemy and do 4 damage to it for 3 costs, that's not bad in my opinion, right? That's pretty good. So that's a pretty interesting card. Mental Detection is a 2-cost event or thwart card. Remove 1 threat from a scheme. Obviously not that great. And for each side knife you control, remove 2 additional threat from that scheme. So if you had 2 side knives, we're now looking at a 2 for 5 card, which is pretty good. But if for each Psy Katana you control, draw a card. This can kind of get crazy. So a 2 for 1 is still not a great trade-off. But if you're able to just generate 2 resources, right, and then use Psy Katana to draw 2 cards off of it, gets kind of good, gets kind of crazy. So there's different ways you can play with this, obviously, but this is I think really cool stuff that they're doing here with that. And then 2-cost event, Psionic Redirect, her defense card basically. It's a hero interrupt. When you would take any amount of damage from the enemy attack, prevent 2 of that damage. For each Psy Katana you control, prevent 2 additional damage. And this is the big one. For each side knife you control, confuse that enemy. So we are seeing now two different ways to confuse your enemy, which will allow us to basically flip down very easily, get back up to that 6 hand size, and be able to exhaust Psi energy cards, right, or Psi upgrade cards, to shuffle Psionic cards back in there, right, to continue confusing and going through different cards. That's really cool to see. Pretty strong, pretty interesting in how you can do it. So, that was one of the biggest things that jumped out to me with her kit, is that she doesn't have this stereotypical, as we know, because there are a few cards missing. She doesn't have that stereotypical like hard hitting like big attack cards, but it seems like she's going to be able to control the board pretty well in pretty interesting ways. So meanwhile, let me just make sure. Yeah. So meanwhile, her signature ally Angel ensures that she can get multiple uses of her boosted stats. We'll talk about that. And her weapons training upgrade lets her ready her Psi energy upgrade so they can generate resources multiple turns in one turn. With all these tools at her disposal, it's clear Psylocke can have the answer to anything that the villain throws at her, with the exception of Stalwart, but we'll get into that later. So her signature ally is Angel. I think it's almost guaranteed, highly likely, that Angel will probably be the next hero. I think that, not that it's safe to say that, but the guess was between Angel and Nightcrawler, and I'm gonna guess Angel. This is almost confirmation. So a 3-cost ally, 1, 2, 3 stat line. After you play Angel from your hand, ready your identity. Now this is hard to get, or this is good again, because you can, when you use one of Psylocke's basic powers, you can flip a Psi energy upgrade. So if you need to flip them over to change things around, you can do that. So it gives you the ability to switch more things around or whatever else, right? So we talk a little bit about our weapons training card, which is a bit interesting. As a 2-cost upgrade, Psylocke gains Retaliate, which is fine. And it's kind of interesting because there's already some people talking about using her in protection and being very efficient with her defending. I could see it, and this makes it a little bit more interesting. I don't know if I would lean too hard into Retaliate, but I think it's one of those nice things to just have. So, it's a hero response. After Psylocke attacks, discard weapon training, which is generally not my favorite thing in the world to do, but that's fine. Ready each weapon upgrade you control. This is kind of cool because, again, it's not a forced response. It's a you could choose to do this. So after Psylocke attacks, again, it's not forced. It's whenever you would like to do this. You can discard this card to ready each weapon upgrade you control. Again, some people are theorizing with this that they would put side holster on, or whatever it's called, that gives you a third restricted keyword. So this way you can use another weapon and ready up 3 weapons. Now you can use those weapons again as resource generators, right? If you had like a sonic rifle that can confuse enemy, or if an enemy is already confused, it can deal damage to an enemy, right? There's a bunch of different things you can do here. So some people are theorizing about that, how that'd be pretty cool, and being able to use that. Now, again, the worst part of this is that it gets discarded, right? You're not gonna be able to use it for a little while, but for me, I see it as a way that when I have a really strong hand, in my head, the way I visualize this, when I have a strong hand and I'm playing these cards that look pretty good, or I have a bunch of good cards in my hand, I need to exhaust a bunch, whatever. I use this to get rid of it, to get 2 more resources. So basically, in one round, I'm generating 4 resources, which is huge, right? That's absolutely huge. So that's kind of how I look at that card. Okay, so they get into some of these other cards, which we'll glance at right now, but this card in particular is crazy. And Captain Britain. So basically, I think it's now confirmed that the British Avengers will be next. We'll see. All right, so though her signature cards give her plenty to work with, Psylocke's pre-built deck gives her even more options in battle. Even though her deck uses the justice aspect, it packs quite a bit of offensive potential, further reinforcing Psylocke's versatility. And it really does. And this is the fun thing if you're a justice player. Call on Betsy's twin brother, Captain Britain, to help you deal with minions and side schemes. Then use Psylocke's Psykatanas to help you pay for Concussive Blow on the villain, which we've seen Concussive Blow before, but still. Captain Britain, 4-cost ally, 3/3/3 stat line with 2 consequential damage each. Now, Captain Britain takes 1 consequential damage after he thwarts a side scheme or attacks a minion, right? So he was trying to control the board state. He only takes 1 consequential damage. Or it says, -1, but same thing. Concussive Blow, we've seen before, 3-cost event. Confuse an enemy if you pay for this card using a fist resource, which we do have the resource generator on one side. Deal 3 damage to the enemy. Again, really leaning into that whole kind of being able to confuse lock an enemy is pretty cool. You may have noticed that between cards like Psionic Training and the aforementioned Concussive Blow and Fury Blades, Psylocke can inflict a lot of confusion with her deck, allowing her to get full use of cards like Cypher, Upside the Head, and Float like a Butterfly. Things are going to get crazy. So Psionic Training is her other upgrade card, which is kind of interesting. It's a 1-cost upgrade. Psylocke ignores the guard and patrol keywords. Always huge, right? Guard and patrol can be a pain to deal with, so this is great. So hero response, not forced, just general hero response. After Psylocke thwarts, discard this card to confuse an enemy. I personally would just leave this card out there for a decent amount of time, and at the very end, or like in a pinch where I really need to confuse the enemy, then I ditch this card. Or if I'm about to reshuffle my deck anyway, then I would. But for me, it's not like a super like, oh, this is the card to use to confuse, because so many of our other events, realistically, the 2 other event cards can already do it. There's probably gonna be 5 or 6 of those cards in the deck, so we're already looking at a bunch of cards that can already confuse right out of the gate. So that's that. But let's look at these 3 cards. So Cypher is a 2/1/1/2 card. Pretty basic stat line. But after Cypher attacks and damages a confused enemy, draw 1 card. That's crazy. That is crazy, because if you could build out Cypher so that you can heal him with like first aid or something like that, get some more HP on him, maybe even do more damage or whatever. But he just has to attack and damage a confused enemy, which you should be confusing the enemy all the time. You get to draw a card. There's a lot of potential with this type of card in a Justice deck. Again, with Justice, you should be confusing the enemy constantly. And now that you can get card draw off it by just exhausting him and then healing him up every now and again, crazy. That's crazy strong, and that's really cool to see. The next one was Upside the Head, which is just, it's bonkers. It's a 1-cost event. After your hero makes a basic attack and damages an enemy, confuse that enemy. If the enemy is already confused, stun it instead. This might be an automatic add to most of my Justice decks, because here's the thing: Justice didn't have a lot of way to stun enemies, right? Generally speaking, there's a lot of confusion that you can get, but stunning is a bit tougher to do with Justice. As a 1-cost event, this makes it much easier, and this is something that I would include in a lot of my decks moving forward, because again, in Justice, you should be confusing the enemy fairly regularly, and now you'll be able to stun them on top of it, right? And a 1-cost to confuse and or not confuse but confuse or stun the enemy, I think is absolutely worth it. Assuming you're making the basic attack that deals damage. That's the only other requirement. And then Float Like a Butterfly is a 2-cost upgrade. Player under player's control, you only allowed to have 1. When a character you control attacks a confused enemy, which again, most of them should be, increase the amount of damage that attacks deals to that enemy by 1, which is crazy, because again, this makes things like what was our other card, the Flurry of Blades, right? That deals the damage. It makes it that much higher each time. So we kind of referenced before with the aggression cards, that there are aggression cards that let you add +1 to your attack. We've seen this, we talked a lot about this with Gambit. Now you're getting the same exact idea with Justice cards, which is really cool to see. Again, it forces you to confuse the enemy, but the fact that this is an upgrade and it just exists, right, as long as that enemy is confused, kind of crazy, kind of huge, really, really cool card. All right, so of course, being a psionic hero with a Justice deck, Psylocke has plenty of options for dealing with threat. In addition to the tools in her own kit, Psylocke can use the power of the mind to play powerful psionic events, or she can use it to fuel ability on telepathy, or for an extra bit of threat removal. Once you've got Psylocke's thwart engine running, clear off the last threat with Lay the Trap for some hefty damage to the villain. Okay, so Power of the Mind is not bad, right? It's not a crazy bonkers card, but it's a good card. Basically, it's a resource card. It's a science resource. Double the number of resources this card generates while paying for a psionic card. Pretty cool, right? Especially for a psionic hero. So this gives a little bit of a buff to what's her face, Phoenix, right? It's another way to get a double resource card. You should have a lot of psionic cards in your deck in general, so this helps that out a little bit. Telepathy is a fine card. It's not amazing or anything, but it's fine. A 1-cost upgrade. Play only if you're a psionic trait. Exhaust telepathy and spend 2 science resources, which you can do with this because it is a psionic card. Actually, could you do that? Paying a psionic card. Actually, no, I don't think you could because you're not paying for psionic cards. Never mind on that. But anyway, you exhaust telepathy and spend 2 science resources. Remove 2 threat from a scheme. It's not bad, right? I mean, if you have extra science resources, it definitely seems like with Psionic, they're going to start pushing you in that direction of science resources. We've kind of seen this before with, what is it? Wasp, right? Wasp should have a lot of science resources in her deck in general to really make the most of her. I think you're just going to see builds like that with Psionic too. You just want to focus a bit more on that. Then the last card they talk about is the player side scheme. Let's go. So the Justice one is a 1 cost event, victory 0, 3 threat removal you gotta do, which Psylocke can do right away, right? She's a 3/1/2 hero right away. So you play this for 1 cost. The player who defeats this scheme deals 5 damage to the villain per person. We are now looking at a Justice card that in a 4-player game can deal 20 damage to the villain and leave it sitting out there, right? So you can just leave this there, leave it down so it only has like 1 or 2 threat left on it. And when you need to do that last big hit in a 4-player game, done, right? As easy as that. And that's how I view this card for Psylocke. I'm going to keep this in the deck every single time. This is a really strong Justice card because, again, most Justice players should be able to thwart 3 pretty easily. I'm going to keep this in the deck because there's a lot of times on Expert where I'm just like, okay, I'm getting ready for the big attack, the big swing at the end. And then if I have a, clear the area, right, where it just removes 2 threat, but it removes the last threat from a scheme, you get to draw a card. This is an easy 5 damage playing that card and getting card draw, right? There's so much that you could do with this. I mean, multitasking even. Okay, you remove 2 off of here, it deals 5 damage, and then 2 off the main or whatever else. There's a lot that can be done with this card. This is a really strong card and really cool to see. So the very end of it is with unrivaled flexibility in your signature kit and a skill set that can adapt to any threat. Psylocke is an awesome hero and a fantastic addition to any hero team. Look forward to picking up the Psylocke Hero Pack when it releases in September. This is a month after the box will release, so you only have to wait 1 month after release. So they're definitely doing some interesting things here with her deck, and they're taking Justice and deck building in a slightly different direction. I like that they're letting Justice players be a bit more aggressive. They're giving us more tools for stunning, for dealing general damage. Another side scheme that's really strong, maybe a little too strong, but we'll get into that later, or maybe some other video. But it's definitely cool to see them really kind of focus on Justice, and they're doing really cool things. Now, again, I'm mainly a Justice player, so I get a little more excited about this than most people, but I think it's really cool stuff they're doing. As far as her cards and her kit, I think it's really interesting what they're doing because, again, unless there's a card that they haven't shown us yet, she doesn't have that massive hitting card, right? She kind of does if she's controlling everyone with Confuse, and then we have the ability through the 1 upgrade, what is it, Float Like a Butterfly or whatever it was, that will allow us to do extra damage. Yeah, Float Like a Butterfly. When a character you control attacks a confused enemy, increase the amount of damage, right? So then it makes it a bit easier or a bit more interesting there. But it's fascinating what they're doing with her deck. That, again, it's not as simple as 3 for 8, right? The stereotypical 3 for 8 damage, or 2 costs for 4 threat, or 2 for 5. There is a little bit more choice to it, and depending on how you flip your cards. And again, I think they've really learned this lesson that they want to make card flipping as easy as possible. And this is just the easiest iteration of it. And this, I think for a multiplayer hero, I think she'll be pretty decent. I think for a solo hero, she's super strong. In general, being able to confuse on command is crazy strong for solo, and she'll be able to do that. Now, obviously, her biggest weakness is going to be stalwart heroes, right? Stalwart heroes are going to negate most of the strengths of her kit. Is it going to make her obsolete? No, but you're probably going to have to play a different way. It's not going to quite work out the way you want. Steady, on the other hand, Steady would normally provide some issues for a deck, or for like a Justice type deck. But with cards like, what was it? I'm already forgetting what it was. Fury of Blades. So you could choose enemy and confuse it, right, for each side knife you control. So hypothetically, you could confuse a steady enemy twice with Fury of Blades. So even if they had steady, you could actually get them to become confused from just 1 card, which does make it a bit easier. So I think with steady villains, she actually still won't be that bad. She won't be as good, obviously, but she won't be as bad. Stalwart is still going to be tricky because a lot of her kit is kind of, the feeling I get is going to be based around how well you can confuse and or stun the villain. So we'll see actually in practice what it ends up being. I think the 4 hand size is a great balance. I saw some people concerned about that. I don't think it's an issue at all, especially since you start with 2 resource generators that can't go away, right? That's huge. They can't go away, and you start with them. That's massive, especially right out of the gate. You're going to want to flip down with her as much as possible to get your strong Psionic cards back in your hand or back in your deck. This opens up a lot of possibility too with like aggression, because there's some strong aggression attack cards and for Psionic that we've had in the past. And if they add in more Psionic cards, I assume they will. We don't know for sure, but I assume that we will start seeing a few more Psionic cards. So this opens up a lot more that you can now shuffle Psionic cards back into your discard pile, back into your deck. This is always really strong, obviously, because as you thin out your deck, you're just leaving like strong cards left over. Plus, you have 2 resource generators on top of it. So I think there's a lot that's gonna work for people here. I think for solo, I think she's gonna be amazing solo, assuming you don't go against a stalwart enemy. She could control the board state very easily right out of the gate. Like I said, I'm really excited. I think she looks really cool. I think she's going to be a blast to play. And I think for a lot of people that really get into deck building and like seeing how cards combo off each other, you're going to be able to really do that with Psylocke, which I think gets a lot of people generally excited. I'm not great at doing combo building for deck playing, but I can definitely see a lot of it in this deck, which is really cool, right? It even jumps out for me with somebody who's not as good. So anyway, that's my general thoughts and feelings. Super hyped, super excited. I was on Team Domino. I might have to switch to Team Psylocke because this is just crazy. So anyway, hope you enjoyed this video. If you want to watch my preview of Next Evolution, I will put it right here, so definitely check it out. And if you made it this far, hit the like button, hit subscribe. It really helps with the channel. See you all next time.